In today's world, Christians are being persecuted in increasing numbers. And here to talk about this subject and several others, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis, who has been with us once before. Let's begin today's conversation by talking a little bit about the Christians in the world today, from your perspective as a military observer.
You know, the persecution, Gary, of Christians is unprecedented across the world. And of course, I focus primarily on the persecution that comes at the hands of the Muslim world. In the Middle East. I think of ISIS and how they've committed genocide, much like the Armenian genocide or the genocide of Jews. They're committing rank genocide by every definition of the UN or any other international organization, and by the acknowledgement of our own government that there's a genocide of Christians in the Mideast, and Syria and Iraq at the hands of ISIS. But it's the intolerance of Muslim governments throughout the region, North Africa, certainly the Middle East and Central Asia, that have promoted this sinister agenda. And now, of course, they're expanding, the Islamic world are expanding into Western Europe and even coming to our own country. And that same attitude of intolerance continues because of the teaching they get in the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadiths of their faith. And of course, if they embrace the ideas of their prophet, Muhammad, he had very little tolerance for people that didn't adhere to his own radical view of the world.
Indeed. We think of the Middle East, and what we think of is, as Christians, we think of the prophecies concerning Israel, how Israel's going to return to the land, which we have seen, by the way. And we've seen Israel grow in strength, and in the economy there is phenomenal. They have become the producer of fruits and vegetables and high-tech devices of all sorts, basically for all of Europe. In other words, they're prospering. But all around Israel, we have Islam. And some of us wonder from time to time, what is Islam doing? And I want you to comment on that. Because we have Turkey in the mix now. We have Iraq having basically fallen. Iran now developing a long-range nuclear capability. We watch all these things, and sometimes it's hard for us to understand what's going on. As Christians, what should we be thinking about the Middle East?
Well, we need to recognize that they're emulating their prophet Muhammad, who persecuted and killed Jews and Christians. From the time in which Muhammad established his religion for, up through, the 14th century AD, you found a persecution and the taking into control the Islamic world. Much of the Christian world was destroyed. Much of the Jewish world was destroyed. They were in the underbelly of Europe. They took over most of Spain. And it wasn't until the Crusades started in the 11th century that you began to get pushback from the Christians. It was out of sheer defense, survival, that they had to do that. And I go through all the Crusades in there and I point out what was necessary. It's not as if Christians and Jews and others that are not as followers of Muhammad don't understand. They wanted to live in peace, and yet these people were radicalizing much of the world and taking captive, and they would chop off heads. They'd take prisoners. They were following the teachings of that prophet Muhammad. So, that's what we face today as well. I'm concerned about a term they call hijab, which is the immigration. They want to take over by slowly becoming the majority population and then imposing what's called Sharia law, which is what you find in places like Saudi Arabia. You find it in places like parts of Iraq and Syria today. And of course, they're beginning to impose it in Europe and even in communities here in the United States. That's an agenda, a very clear agenda. They will follow it if given the opportunity.
Now, going back to the Middle East for a moment, and I have my Bible open here to, on purpose, by the way, to Ezekiel 36 and 37. These two chapters precede, I suppose, one of the most read chapters in Christian prophecy, Ezekiel 38, talking about an invasion of Israel. But when you look just ahead of that invasion, you have laid out in Ezekiel 36 a description of Israel's enemies. And they're saying this, because the enemy hath said against you, aha, even the ancient high places are ours in possession. So we start out with that little description. The prophet says, your enemies are all saying, all the territory that used to belong to the Jews now belongs to us. Well, that sounds like today's newspaper.
It does.
And then you go to Ezekiel 37, and we have the vision of the dry bones coming together and consolidating into, I think, what we're seeing as modern Israel. And then following that, we have a war. So essentially, the Bible is pointing out what we can expect in the Middle East. But I think something none of us really thought about was the ferocity and the absolute zeal that's found in Islam. It's unpredictable almost. We tend to look at our enemies as slumbering, sleeping, the way we are, and yet they've got a program.
A program that is very vicious, that has taken over much, if not all, of northern Africa and seeping into the sub-Sahara, certainly all over the Middle East, whether it's the Ottomans and the Turks, or it's the Saudis and the Salafist Takfiri views, or it's the Ali Khomeinis, who are the Grand Ayatollah of Iran, or it's into Afghanistan, Pakistan, certainly parts of Malaysia, certainly in India, all of the stands, the Caucasus, a broad brush around the world. You have 1.6 billion Muslims who, in many cases, are so-called moderates. They don't believe in what they really say they believe. But those of which do believe are radical. And they have no tolerance for those of us that call ourselves Christians, because we are not going to embrace their radical, prophet and their view as outlined in the Quran. So we face those threats. They are going to continue to expand. We've pushed back in the past, certainly during the Crusades. Unfortunately, in Western Europe, I don't have a lot of hope at this point, because I see these little ghettos that are expanding like the dots on a Dalmatian, and soon the entire continent could be, black rather than white in terms of the overcoming by the Islamic population, because that's their agenda. That's what they have in mind. And naively, the Christians that once dominated Western Europe have abandoned their faith, and now they just see this movement that they don't quite understand.
So what we have now is a program that's basically aimed at Western civilization. And I wonder to what degree we are conscious of this as a people. Sometimes I think certain segments of our society are very conscious of it, but I wonder. Now you're sitting in a place where you're observing from the military perspective our preparation against these enemies. What do you think? Where do you think we are right now? How would you assess our preparedness to defeat this foe?
Well, it's an ideological fight as well as a kinetic fight, an actual fight. In the country, you talk to the Muslims that you survey in the United States, many of them are proponents of jihad. Many of them are proponents of Sharia law over the U.S. Constitution. Many are proponents of pushing the Prophet Muhammad's agenda across our country. They want dominance. That's what Islam is about. It's not about getting along and living with others in a diverse, assimilated population. No, it's about getting control, dominating. I think, for the most part, most Americans are naive. They are accepting, and they're just like the frog in the boiling water. They're waiting, and they think that this is a tolerant thing to do, and yet we are losing inch by inch. In the United States, there are communities of radical Islamists, and they are embracing Sharia law in spite of the constitutional implications of this. And we're saying, oh, let's be tolerant. Well, we're going to be tolerant to our own deaths. And that's what we're facing long term if we don't wake up to this threat.
The book is called Never Submit, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis. And Bob has written this and a book that we talked about on a previous program called Future War. And you put these two things together. Number one, the idea that we do have an enemy. And the enemy is, I suppose, could be called fairly effective at this point. The other side of it is that war is turning into something that I think most of us never dreamed it would be. Mechanized, computerized, to the point that it's almost a science fiction scenario we're looking at now. And that's what future war is all about. Put these two ideas together. Islam meets the battlefield of future war. What are we looking at?
Oh, we're looking at disaster. Islam is an ideology that is spreading. It's inculcating the brains of young people in the United States to be radicalized, and we see these lone wolf so-called encounters in places like Orlando, Chattanooga, San Bernardino, Boston, and elsewhere, and we'll continue to see them. And you know, the nature of what the Islamic faith has been teaching is not going to go away. It's going to continue. There's no compromising. There's no reformation. You know, either you follow the Prophet Muhammad or you don't. If you don't, you're not a true believer. And then, of course, when you bring all the technology of future war and where this world is heading, you know, it's not a pretty place.
I suppose my question is, will our technology win out over the medievalism of Islam? In other words, do we have a high enough technology now to really be successful in terms of repelling a warfare that takes place, I suppose, within isolated little cells that are all ready. They're prepped to go out and bomb certain electrical substations and key elements of water dispersion, and they're ready to do their little works, but we're ready for something that goes into outer space, cyber war, future war. Can the United States, as a future warrior, defeat guerrilla warfare, is what I suppose I'm asking.
Well, insurgencies are always classically difficult to defeat. And this is an ideologically driven insurgency that I point out and Never Submit. It's for the hearts and the minds of the people. Now, the future war, what I talk about, certainly it's about terrorism, but cyber, space, you know, these cyborgs, those are technologies. So they're really different planes. Yes, we can use space to target people. We can use cyber to track people. We can use weapons to destroy people. But it's what they're looking at. They're conducting an information operation around the world through the internet and through the mosque and radicalizing people to hate the West, to hate what we stand for, you know, to hate Christians in particular and Jews especially. And they're transforming minds that are vulnerable to manipulation, and that's why we find these killers, whether they be ISIS or you know, those in Somalia or Yemen or in Western Europe or here in the United States. There are people here that are vulnerable. And so they're going to define our future in terms of creating fear through terror. Terror being a tactic they've used effectively and will continue certainly for decades if you believe what the National Director of Intelligence says in this country.
Islam is attacking Christianity right now. A lot of that is documented in Never Submit. I want to ask you now, what should we as Christians be doing other than informing ourselves? And you've got some information right here. There's a lot of information out there. But I get the feeling that the church at large is unaware.
Well, it is, and it's naive. You know, it wants the rest of the world to take care of itself. We'll take care of our congregation, our local church. They need to be aware of the impact it has on schools, the impact it has in prisons, where it's a real recruiting ground, thanks to the Saudis who pump in millions and millions of dollars to American prisons and pump out people that are radicalized and go and do these terrible things. We need to look at how our State Department treats other governments. The Saudi Arabians, who fuel a lot of the radicalism in the world, they have no tolerance at all for Jews and Christians, none.
Right. Yeah.
They won't allow us to carry our Bibles openly or worship openly. Why do we tolerate a government like that? And we call them our friends? No, they aren't our friends. And much of the Islamic world is like that. We need to recognize that we need policies to push back against that. And of course, the media culture, it's terribly naive, or purposely, to turn our eyes away from the viciousness of some of these enemies, the Muslim enemies that may be perpetrating themselves in this country.
You spoke of the media, and a lot of the media, I think, has been bought by big-scale, large-scale oil money from the Middle East, financed by oil money. Therefore, it would tend to keep rather silent about all this so that more money will flow in. I think that may be part of it. So really, we've got a series of maneuvers on several levels that are designed to infiltrate our society. I'm thinking as a Christian, as I'm listening to you talk, and I'm thinking, what should I be praying about? What can I actually do in concert with other Bible-believing Christians out there? And I think you do, in your book, sort of issue a challenge to Christianity.
No doubt. They're a challenge to get involved, a challenge to recognize the enemy for what the enemy says that they are. They self-identify. This is what we have in mind. This is what we intend to do. There are nonprofit organizations that have infiltrated the White House that promote a radical agenda. The Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, that is very close to the president and his primary advisors. We have organizations that are in the media that are trying to say, no, we're not like that. We're moderates. No, they're not. They're pushing an agenda that promotes Hamas, Hezbollah, a lot of these radical groups. There's a recognition, and there needs to be in the West, that our tolerance has to come to an end when it comes to people that want to destroy our civilizations and our faith. And these people have a very well articulated, outlined history. Their books are very clear about how they treat us. All you have to do is go on YouTube and watch some of their videos. There are imams that are talking about hatred. Pigs and Jews are the same thing, they declare. Treatment of women, you can keep them subjected, cover them up, treat Christians as what they call kafirs, unbelievers that can be subjected, second-class citizens if you tolerate them at all. Even ISIS, interestingly, declared that they have no tolerance, even though the prophet said that you should, of Jews and Christians. So what do? They behead them. They put them on as a crucifix on crosses, or they bury them alive. And then they take their women, they rape them, they keep them as sex slaves. This is not a very tolerant people, and they expect us to be tolerant of them. How naive we are as a culture. We need to recognize that this is an evil threat against our civilization, certainly against our faith.
So I see a picture emerging here as I hear Lieutenant Colonel Robert Maginnis talking. And again, the name of the book is Never Submit. That's a tall order, never submit, because it sends a bit of a chill down your back. Is somebody going to force me or try to force me to submit one of these days? And if so, what will I do? That's a growing question, and I think you addressed the question. And you're sitting in a seat, and let's talk about this for a moment. You're a Pentagon advisor. You have had a long military career. You think in terms of strategic planning. Where are we? Where should we go? And speak to the Christian community.
Well, the Christian community, one, needs to wake up. Pastors need to teach about the threats. They need to recognize this is not just a singular monolithic threat. It's a threat against our schools, against our media. It's against our very type of life, against our U.S. Constitution. These people are intent upon transforming the world. The never submit comes from never Islam. Islam means submission. And what they advocate is dominance, dominance across every culture and every faith. And so, we need to wake up. We need to hold our governments accountable. We need to make sure that we can compassionately treat people, but we don't have to accept their view of the world. Our view of the world is based upon Christian values, biblical principles that say very clearly, we love people, we want to lead them to Jesus Christ, but what the Prophet Muhammad teaches is something that is hatred and it's dominance, and it will give us the opportunity to submit, and if we don't, off with our heads.
And we have seen that happen. In fact, it's very interesting to me that the book of Revelation speaks of people being beheaded for their faith. And we think of Revelation as being somewhere in the future. The way you talk, it may not be too far in the future until these things begin to come to pass.
Oh, it's not. You've seen plenty of what ISIS has done in beheading people in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and elsewhere. Yeah. There was beheading attempts in this country as well, a number of those that I can think of. And, in Blacksburg, Virginia here recently, there was a guy that was yelling out, God is great in Arabic, and he was trying to carve off the head of one of his victims. We've seen it elsewhere in the United States. They believe in this.
Here in Oklahoma City.
Yes.
A similar situation. Yeah. Well, let's go to where we need to go at this point in time. Bob Maginnis has written 2 books. One of them we talked about on a previous program called Future War, which is talking about not only the ethics, but the ethics as they interface with high tech developments that are now taking place. We have the ability to assassinate at long range, to use super weapons from on high, if you will, from outer space, to build suits for soldiers that are going to be able to do things that we hardly are able to imagine right now, except through sci-fi. And we have arrived at that place, that time, where the unimaginable is having to be imagined. And we as Christians, I think, are a bit behind in our understanding of just where we are. And let's conclude by sort of raising the consciousness of the Christian out there. Where are we? What should we prepare for right now?
Well, the threats are real. As we've alluded to, the terrorism will continue for decades. The ideology is what we need to defeat, and not just the individuals. We face a transhumanist where they combine the biology and the machine to make a cyborg-like soldier, super soldiers that are the trend of the future. The Chinese, the Russians working on them. We're working on them. Whether they're in a ballistic outfit that has climate control and weapon systems that can be used on call, or you can remotely, control these artificial intelligence beings. Space weapons are really getting out of hand. Lasers from space, ballistic missiles that may be on asteroids. We've seen the cyber threat, which is invisible, that can cut down any cyber-based system, whether it be an electric grid or your bank account. Certainly weapons of mass destruction, which could destroy the crop growing capability of a country or just stop us from reproducing as human beings. I mean, these threats are here today. They are growing, and I outline them in Future War in great detail.
And you deal with these questions as practical realities. I know as just a homeowner in the good old USA, as long as my electricity is coming through the lines and I've got water and sewage and a little money in the bank, I'm okay. But you're reminding me that, wait a minute, maybe I'm not as okay as I think I am. Somebody could pull the string out there. And you are forced in your position to begin to think about these things and to write about them. I might add that Future War is 350 pages plus many appendices, which brings it to over 400 pages. A lot of information. And you think about these things all the time. Do you get depressed?
Well, it's easy to get depressed, Gary, because the future is vague. As it says, in 1 Corinthians 13, it's kind of dark.
Yeah.
I'm not looking through a clear glass. I'm looking at things that look threatening. The black swans of the future, the megatrends that are transforming the future, and at the same time templated with these 5 major threats that are really, sci-fi-like, but are really here today. And so what do you do? How do you approach it? And that's what I answer in the third part of the book, as to how we as Christians address all these issues using biblical principles and biblical values.
When I read Future War, I did not get depressed. I have to tell you, I got interested, I got excited, particularly within the context of what I know about Bible prophecy. Because this book jibes with Bible prophecy in an amazing way. And Bob Maginnis, as a Christian, automatically, I think, integrates those thoughts into his writing as a Pentagon advisor. So you want some really up-to-date information on what's going on right now in the world that you don't see every day. It's behind the scenes. Read Future War. And by the way, we're offering that for $19.95. Go to prophecywatchers.com, the online bookstore. Dial down until you find Robert Maginnis, and you'll find a section there where this book, Future War, and his other book, Never Submit, will be there. And you can order either one at $19.95 or both. The Future War package, you'll find it listed under Future War package, both books for $34.95. I think there's uplift in them. There is Christian good sense, and there's a lot of intelligence that you don't find just every day. It's been my pleasure to talk to you. It's been kind of an eye-opening series of conversations. What would you leave us with, Bob?
Well, we face a sobering future, but we face a future where we as Christians have hope. We have hope in Christ, and we look forward to his coming. And until that happens, we need to be engaged. We need to take care of our families, our churches, our communities. And I think that's the charge that God has given all of us until that time comes.
And indeed, we are looking for that blessed hope, the glorious appearing of our Lord God and Savior Jesus Christ. Looking every day. I'm looking at books that talk about cyborgs, but really in the front of my mind, I'm looking up. And I think you are too,
Yes,
right?
Very much so.
Hey, it's been most informative talking with you.
Thank
May
you.
the Lord bless you and yours, and give you eyes to see and ears to hear.
Thank you.
And hope to talk to you again soon. I'm Gary Stearman. Hey, we're watching. You be watching too. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com, where you can sign up for our free email newsletter. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.